are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
You know, growing up, white people were just like these nameless, faceless people. There were people over there. And not to mention, I grew up as a black man on the South Side. I had a very Afrocentric education. Mm-hmm. We didn't graze African-American history like we got into it. My opinions on white people were shaped by real history.
Sure.
Not to mention, my parents grew up in the South. The absence of any meaningful interaction growing up, coupled with real history and a dozen other factors, had discipled me toward a certain view of certain people. And so this was an intensive submersion into a culture that wasn't my own. And this is even before I get to the Vineyard.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And what's so encouraging to me is that the bridge is faith.
It is.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. As we celebrate Black History Month, in today's episode, our host, Jay Pathak, talks to Geno Olison, who's the leader of the Black Pastors and Leaders Association for Vineyard USA and pastors South Suburban Vineyard Church in the Chicago area. Let's listen in.
Well, Geno, thanks for joining me to do this.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Of course. Well, you know, I was thinking about, I remember going to a conference, and I can't remember where. This is the curse of doing what we do for a living, is that so many of the memories you have when you've been leading in something like we've been leading in are in a lobby of a hotel, a coffee shop in a city somewhere, standing in the back of a sanctuary or worship service, or in the front praying, or in some kind of sea of chairs because you were at some kind of thing at a conference. And I actually have no idea where we were, but I remember sitting in some kind of cafe, and I remember it being in an urban environment, like we were in a city somewhere. And that was the first time I started to hear your heart for your church plants, and here's what I'm dreaming about, and here's what I'm hoping for.
St. Louis.
Was it St. Louis?
We somehow we ended up together at the Urbana conference with Multiply Vineyard.
That sounds right. That checks out.
We had just planted maybe maybe a year in.
Yep.
Yeah, we had to spend all day in the exhibit hall, and then
see, this is what I'm trying to say. Meals. They
have some memories.
They just blend together. And then of course, we served on the executive team where pretty much every meeting you're in some hotel somewhere.
Right.
Usually tacked to another meeting. Mm-hmm. So you're often in these really nice places, cool city, maybe like a beach town or kind of a quaint, cool city in the South, or you're wherever, and you don't really see the city at all. You end up like in some all day. Exactly.
But you have a lot of good conversations that week, though.
You really do. Yeah. But what's hard is usually my memories work around reference points, I was at this restaurant, or I was walking in this part of wherever. Mm-hmm. But in all of these kind of vineyard memories, it's like a different fluorescently lit room, with those little pads of paper they give you at each little desk spot, or a certain different kind of plastic tree. I'm trying to
all your significant memories are peppered with
exactly
bagel trays and
exactly, just kind of generic stuff, like hotel stuff, So anyway, I'm impressed you dialed that in. Well, I think you've probably listened. Well, you've probably memorized every single podcast, so I need not
absolutely
tell you even one bit of it. But but I just love to hear your story, and then of course you're doing incredible things to serve the vineyard you always have, and you have a really exciting. Well, you're in an exciting moment in the life of your church too. I mean, given that everyone got knocked backward with COVID. So that notwithstanding, there's, incredible stuff going on. Every time I talk to you, I'm really encouraged to hear about your church. So,
well, thank you, man. Thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
So tell me about where you were born, where you grew up.
So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. We're right now in the south suburbs of Chicago in a community called the Homewood Flossmoor communities, 2 cities right next to each other. And so, but I grew up in the city on the south side, and I grew up in exclusively Black community. I'm a preacher's kid, so my parents are not just pastors, but they're church planters. And so my parents came to faith after years and years of running the streets and being career criminals, and the Lord grabbed a hold of them. So my earliest memories, Jay, include church, interestingly enough. So, you don't put this all together until somebody explains it to you later, but when I think back on my youngest memories, which happened to be in church, we used to go to this church a couple of blocks from the house. It's called the Old Ship of Zion Missionary Baptist Church.
Wow, strong name.
And when I think about it, my father never set foot in that church because he wasn't a Christian yet. According to my mom, he was still getting high and doing his thing. And so I remember being on the pew in these churches, me and my sisters. And my mom tells me that one night my father had gotten high and he was watching Preacher on TV. That's what he did. He got high on Saturday nights and he watched church on TV.
It's quite a tradition. Yeah.
And got saved through the TV. Pastor Clifford Turner in the Liberty Hour got saved through the TV. And so when my dad started going to church, we didn't go to the Old Ship of Zion Missionary Baptist Church anymore. We went way across town to go to this church where he had gotten saved through the TV. And I remember, Jay, we didn't have a car at the time, so the 7 of us would take 2 buses and a train.
Wow.
For every service to go across town to go to this church. And so my earliest memories are memories that involve this beautiful Black community, which was an exclusively Black community. Our social network was exclusively, at least my memory, African American schools, churches. But it was a rich Black experience for me.
Yeah. Well, and how old was it when you started going to the church? Like when you remember the shift?
I don't know. I mean, how old do you have memories of walking around?
So young.
3 or 4. Yeah, young. Yeah, 3, 4, 5, maybe. Okay. I don't know.
And where are you and your siblings?
I am. Okay, so I have a bunch of sisters.
Okay.
And my twins. I don't have any brothers. My twin sister and I are the youngest.
Oh.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so when you say a bunch, I like that you don't even say a number. You're like, it's big, okay? That's all you need to know.
Yeah. So I have 7 sisters.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so a lot of, it was me and my dad. Now,
that's a good summary. You're like, a bunch. I got 7
so 3
sisters.
of my sisters are half sisters, so I didn't grow up in the house with them.
Right.
And technically, another sister is my aunt, who my mom raised when my grandmother passed away, and so she's a sister to us, right?
Right.
So I grew up around all these women and my father, who was this like manly dude, born and raised, discipled by the streets, and so I was attached to his hip.
Yeah, and so your mom's going to church, he's not. So was he raised in church somehow?
No, absolutely
even before this. So not even so it really is like a conversion from not absence, but he really isn't like hearkening back to something. He's going
No. Neither of them. I mean, raised by the streets, running the streets as teenagers. Drugs,
fascinating.
The whole deal, sticking people up.
And they were And they were from Southside Chicago as well, or were they?
Yeah, well, they came. My mom's from Birmingham, and my father's from Mississippi, and they both came to Chicago, as I understand it, in their early years, and so.
Really? And so did they come as kids? They came as kids to Chicago. And why did their family move to Chicago?
I have no idea.
Fascinating.
I have no idea.
Yeah, because, I mean, and as you know, I mean, if anybody reads or thinks about these things, like the migration patterns, the way people are moving around the country is a big part of like American history. Why do people move in the ways that they do? And
yeah, we never got into that, and so from what I could gather, it was young, and I never grew up with a lot of extended family. My mom's family, she has a lot of half sisters and stuff. In Birmingham, I have a vague memory of meeting my mother's father on a trip to Birmingham that I vaguely remember. We went on a Greyhound bus as a kid, but other than that, I don't have. I never met my father's father. My father's mother was around and would keep us. I have few memories of, going to her house, but I didn't really grow up with grandparents like that or a lot of extended family.
Right. So it really is. So this encounter with God really sort of sets a new generational pattern. Like
it absolutely does, because where we grew up, it's a beautiful community, but we were in the hood, man. So drugs, prostitution, gangs, and the interesting thing is that my father, because he had come up in the streets and he was just well respected in the community that we lived in, I never got recruited for gangs, and nobody ever messed with me because they knew and respected my father. In fact, a lot of his friends probably thought this was just like another one of his hustles. Like the church thing was just, this is just another angle.
Right.
And so it took him a while to figure out that, he had gotten saved for real. And the Lord had captured his heart. So to your point, if my father doesn't become a Christian, my whole trajectory is just different. Yeah. As a young male in this environment, it's just completely different.
But he was still, it's interesting the way you're describing. So he still had enough connect and rep with the dudes he ran around with that they knew enough to know, man, something's changed with this guy, and we're not going to mess with his son. Like, leave him be.
No, he was really well respected. In fact, when my mother and father planted their church, they planted like 3 blocks from our house in the YMCA. So for years and years and years, we were on 50th and Indiana in the YMCA, not very far from the Robert Taylor Homes, which is a very famous housing project in Chicago. And so who would naturally come to our church plant were people in the community, people who were dealing with all manners of really dramatic, like, degrees of brokenness, whether it be drugs, whether it be broken families, addiction, all sorts of things, right? And so it was just super, super interesting. But when I think about my spiritual formation, which is hard to unhook from how I was socially formed as a person, so much of that had to do with church. I mean, I remember as a young kid going to these church services. One, these vivid memories I have of standing on a bus stop with my family, 7 of us, catching several buses and a train way across town to go to this church where my dad had got saved, right? And just, there was no kids' church, so we sat in the services.
Oh, yeah. And
me and my cousin, who would be with me, we had to stand. If we would fall asleep, my father would make us stand up. No, he didn't make us stand up in the back.
No, right there.
Right where we were sitting, we had to stand up. Now, Andrew, he learned how to sleep standing up. So. But we had to stand up, Right. But so much, and look, I guess I was making sense of some of it, but a lot of it was probably going over my head. But so much of my spiritual formation was just me as a kid being in so many services. There's 3 services a week on a light light week.
Yeah.
Then there was,
And I'm imagining that's not an hour-long service, or not?
No. There was no rush, you know.
No time signatures. There's no countdown clock for the preacher.
It was just church, you know. And Pastor Turner was a good preacher.
Yeah.
But he could also sing, and so if your preacher could sing, the service is going to be longer.
Right. That's
Because
right.
Worship would happen. And he get up there and he had a song, you know.
That's
and
right. Just
the
go
band
right
would just
into
know,
it.
hey, let's just flow.
Yeah.
And so I just remember that, man. It was so formational for me, and so much of how I value the church reaches back to those moments in those churches because, you know, we were like I said, we were catching a couple of buses and a train, and I think at least twice that church bought us cars. It wasn't uncommon for Pastor Turner to stand up and be like, "Hey, the Olisons need a car. Who's going to help me get them a car?" And he'd take out a bankroll and I'm going to start it off. And then just hundreds of people would come, and by
done.
we would go get the car the next day, cash, right? Imagine what's your thoughts about the church and Christian community as a kid, seeing that happen more than once?
Yeah.
Right. And so, not only that, you know, I'm a musician. I love music, and so just the music in the church was spiritual for me. I didn't play music, and I didn't pick up an instrument until I came to college, but I would watch the band. It was called the Sanctified Band, right? Pastor Turner was instrumental in praise bands rather than choirs, and so it was kind of cutting edge.
Yeah.
But this was the best band in the city. I'm not even exaggerating. And so I would just be mesmerized. And so all these hooks getting me as a young kid through this, right?
Yeah. And when does your dad and your mom plant the church at the Y? Is that early? Is that later?
I'm probably 8, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. So pretty quick.
Pretty quick.
That's pretty fast turnaround.
Well, we were there for a while. I mean, they changed locations, you know.
Well, but if you're alive when he starts going, it's less than 10 years then. I mean, it's 6
I was
years later.
I was less than 10. I was probably
But
8.
if you just think about somebody coming to Christ and then starting the clock on when they're going to plant a church, 6, 7 years later, that's a pretty fast turnaround.
Yeah. And again, the timeline is a bit fuzzy.
No, but whatever it is, there's something dedicated enough in his heart, in his life, that he's putting his kids on buses and trains. And then now he's thinking about his neighborhood. He's going, I got to do something for these people. God has put it on my heart to plant a church. That's pretty impressive. And
so we start
theological training. Did he do?
Well,
training?
there was training through the church,
right?
And so this was a full gospel church. We grew up in the full gospel church.
Yeah.
Training and equipping. There was always some type of class or something.
Yep.
And so, man, I remember. Because, I mean, we were the church planting team.
Right, yeah, exactly. You were recruited without saying yes, right, exactly.
And so
right.
my job was, I was the audio man. So we had this box of Radio Shack gear that we'd load into the old Morris room that may or may not have been set up that week
right.
in the YMCA. And we would play these cassettes for worship. That's what worship was, you know.
Because you can't get a whole band together yet.
No, you can't get a whole band together. And I just mastered this art of just like crossfading from song to song. And
just drop it down, bring it back in. Right.
I'm telling you, man, it was an art. And
tape crossfading. I love it.
And it wasn't like my mom was a worship leader, so it wasn't like we planned the sets beforehand. I was just so familiar with the music. I go with her to the music store, and we get the new Integrity Music, you know, tape or Fred Hammond tape, and I would listen to it all night, so I knew the songs, I knew what the moment was, and so the Lord would just meet us powerfully in dingy little room in the YMCA. And at the beginning, there was just a lot of empty chairs. My dad,
Right. Well, that's like most church
and
plans.
us,
Right.
and
Yeah.
us.
Right.
But people over the years just begin to come, man.
Wow. And so that's happening all the way through to high school? I mean, all the way.
Oh yeah,
all the way,
yeah.
It's all the way through. Like, so
All the way
now you're
through.
not just a kid taking buses and trains.
No, I'm a preteen. I'm a teenager. We changed locations, and this is just. And we
This is
grew up
life.
with the kind. Yeah, we grew up the kind of Christian life where it's like, it was church was the center of our life.
Right.
And it was that way before we planted the church, which was interesting. It wasn't like, oh, now that my dad's a pastor. Like,
Right.
It was like we went to church and we built our life around the church schedule.
Yeah.
So if you had sports, that was great. But you weren't going to miss any church
Right.
because of some extracurricular, right?
Right.
And so I think our dear brothers and sisters could have gone a bit overboard with things, you know.
Yeah.
We would joke about everything being, demonic.
Right.
And, you couldn't have certain cereal or
Sure. Yeah.
But we would come to discover that mostly expensive things were demonic. It was just
They just happened to be. Yeah, that's right.
like just say you don't have the money. It's not.
Right. Don't call it demonic.
It's $4 a box for Count Chocula cereal. That's what
Yeah. Well, I wasn't raised around faith, but there were other reasons that we didn't have demons, but that's real bad for you.
right.
So, are your mom and your dad working other jobs while they're pastoring, or has this become
At the beginning,
totality of their vocation?
At the beginning, my father was working at my father worked at a uniform store before he planted, but then he would work construction. My mom worked as a rep for a bank downtown. But after a number of years, they both had come off of their jobs in order to be in the ministry. And so it was interesting because when they came off their jobs, like things got really tight financially. So I've really have this memory of things just being very, very tight financially a lot of the time growing up. But, there was so much like family love and connection that like we knew we were broke.
Right.
But, it was still a very rich child. Now, my sisters might tell you a different story, right?
Sure.
But for me, it was like, oh, a lot of the people I go to school with are broke too. So maybe this is just...
Yeah, this is just the way it is. Yeah, totally. This isn't necessarily church. This is just living. Yeah, right. Wow,
But
that's
it was an
amazing.
opportunity even for our new community that we planted. I talked about how, the church would raise money to get us a car,
Yeah.
But even when things would get tight or things would break I just remember there would be times where the heat would go out, right? Or, which means in the winter, the pipes would freeze and stuff like that. Or, the heat would go out and we'd have to cordon off a section of the house and heat the house with the stove, or the pipes would freeze. People from the church would bring these big 10-gallon jugs of water just so we can, bathe and cook with. So my life is peppered with these moments of struggle, but always like the church responded to us.
Right.
In really important ways.
Wow. I mean, what formative... I mean, of course, I'm cheating. I'm forecasting forward on what you do now and how you've planted and the things you do. But it's just interesting. It would be interesting if we had another hour to talk about how many of the things when you're church planting felt intuitive or drew you back to those days. I just find so many people who've been in ministry came in to a church that's established and everything sort of works. So the work of church planting feels really unfamiliar to them. They're like, man, I got to, run a soundboard. I've never done that. I was on staff of this church. I don't know how to do any of this.
Right.
Man, I got to drywall like the kids area with some other, I've never done this. But my hunch would be your intuitions were probably like, whatever. This is just like what we do. We do all the things.
Not only that, Jay, but my parents didn't have a church plant team. They weren't sent out with $50,000, $60,000 like we were. And so church planting was challenging. Don't get me wrong. But to me, it was a breeze in comparison. Because our team, no, I mean, you got to think about this, right?
No, I bet, yeah.
And so, again, I always had that comparison of so much struggle and, you know, not a whole lot of strategy and stuff like that. And the way we were coached by Michael and Multiply, I mean, we went to church, we went to boot camps for years before we planted, right?
That's right.
So, by comparison,
it's not even close.
Not even close.
And you have a team and you have a thought about how you're going to do that and all the training. Then you have connection and coaching and da-da-da-da-da. And so your folks, so that's a positive experience for you. You're going through high school doing all of these things. But then you decide to go to college.
I did.
Not in Chicago.
No. In fact, I applied to 3 schools. I applied to Western Michigan in Kalamazoo. I applied to Purdue. And I applied to the University of Illinois. My sister was there at the time.
Okay.
And what made the decision for me was, you know, you get those offer letters and that out-of-state tuition made the decision real quick.
Like, hey, you can come, but it's going to cost you more than you could ever imagine.
I'm like, why does it cost so much money to go? So University of Illinois was... in-state helps. In-state.
A lot, yeah.
And again, I had a sister there who was in her, I guess it would have been her 2nd or 3rd year. And so in 99, I graduate from Dunbar High School, moved 2.5 hours south to go to the University of Illinois. And I mean, some of you heard my story before, but it was a shocking experience.
But in what ways? I mean, I can imagine more than one.
When you come from, there's a couple of things, man. You come from an all black everything to what felt like all white everything.
Sure. Yeah.
Overwhelmingly white everything. It's just a dizzying social thing, right?
Well, and it's instant. It's like
it is
there's
absolutely
no gradual kind of get to know this.
It's interesting. Plus, on top of that, I'm a church kid, Jay. Literally, and I'm not joking with you. I was either at school, I was either at home, or I was at church.
Yep.
It wasn't like, hey, Mom, I'm going to Jimmy's. I'll be back later. It was like, right?
Yeah. Well, if you're going to be with Jimmy, it's at church.
Like, you can see Jimmy at church. He can come. We'll pick him up. Tell his mom we'll pick him up.
Exactly.
Right. And so my life, again, I wasn't trying to run the streets or anything like that. In fact, I had decided that being a straight-laced kid that doesn't get in trouble was like, nobody was successfully bad, you know, around me. Everybody's getting in trouble.
Interesting.
Dying, going to jail. Like my sisters were never really that successful at sneaking out or anything like that. So I just sort of put it together that it's just easier to follow the rules, right? That's just
it doesn't go
Enneagram oneness, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
So I get to college, and on that first night, my parents dropped me off. I'm laying in the bed, and it occurred to me that this is the first time in my life that I have a choice whether or not to be Christian or not. You know, my father would say to us, hey, if you live in this house, if you're not a Christian, you better pretend like it. You know, he would say that, and he was only half joking. Right. And so it occurred to me, like, for the very first time, I got a choice. Like, I could go and catch up on all the stuff that, you know, a young church boy with very strict parents, like, everything I missed out on. But what felt interesting to me, and I didn't have this language at the time, but like when I look back, I just didn't know anything else. And it was a little bit, maybe frightening is not the best word, but like the prospect of like trying to do something else didn't seem all that appealing to me, you know? And so I just knew pretty quickly that I was going to try to find a Christian community.
So that's so interesting to me, Geno, because obviously you pastor. How many kids at that exact stage are like, this is my moment. I'm going to strike out. I'm going to do the thing I never did as a good church kid. I'm going to just go for it. But you had done the calculus and went, I've never really seen that go great for anybody.
I had, and I don't know if it was a very conscious thought.
No.
I think,
Right.
it was just, and part of my wiring, I'm not like, I probably went to 1.5 parties in college. It just wasn't my scene. It was,
Well, it's
it
not your
wasn't my
scene 'cause
scene.
you have a scene, which is I'm doing life in church. I'm doing life with people that follow Jesus. That's just, it's an encouragement in that I think there's some kind of message in some church circles, which is, if your kid is too connected in life with church and with God, they're just gonna freak out. They're gonna rebel.
You know what? And I think that's probably true for a lot of people, but
Right.
my personal experience, which I can't,
Everybody's different.
I can't put that on everybody.
Right.
But that doesn't ring true to me. In fact,
Right.
I feel like, now again, if you talk to my sister, you have my sisters on here, they'd probably I'm sure they had a very different experience than me,
Yeah.
right? But to me, the Lord just kept me stupid about a lot of stuff.
Right. Right.
When I look back on certain situations, I go, how did I get out of that situation without
Totally.
doing something stupid with that woman? She was willing, like I was missing
Right.
all the signals, right?
Totally.
But the Lord just he kept me stupid,
Yeah.
just some things didn't appeal to me and stuff like that. And so I think the Lord was, for a long time, I had a bit of insecurity about just my testimony. You gotta imagine, I'm growing up in a church context
Yep.
where we did testimony service. I mean, and we're in a context where drugs, prostitution,
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff, right? And I'm hearing on a weekly basis these dramatic testimonies, and these people weren't lying because we knew their story.
Just wild stuff.
I got shot 8 times in the face, and I'm here today. Or, I was strung out on drugs, and the Lord delivered me. And so I'm like, what's my testimony?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm super insecure about it.
Right.
At a point, but the older I got, and my father said to me one time, because he had a dramatic testimony, all kinds of dysfunction and stuff that he had to overcome. He's a heroin addict at one point, and the Lord delivered him after just locking himself in a room for a week, right? He kicks the habit, and there's a divine intervention there because of how that would have a hold on you. And he said to me, Geno, my testimony is the Lord rescued me from all this stuff. He said, but that doesn't have to be your story. He said, my prayer for you, boy, is that the Lord would keep you from all those things. And so the older I get, I begin to see that it is just as miraculous to be kept from all of the things that would claw at a person who grew up where I grew up.
Oh, man.
It's just as miraculous to be kept from that than it is to be rescued down the line.
Maybe.
And so I begin to see my story as not like, oh, I don't have a testimony, but boy,
Right.
do I, right? Because, we were so void of people who said, hey, I'm in my 40s and I've never had a drink.
Right.
And say not that drinking is wrong, but you don't have to drink. Like if you don't want, right? Or hey, I got to my wedding night, and my wife and I we fumbled around in the dark because we had no experience. Like
Right.
we didn't know anybody like that.
Right.
And so what a gift it is if you're somebody who has stayed away or kept your nose relatively clean, what a testimony it is to those coming behind you that, hey, it's possible to not sleep with half the school before you
that's
get
right.
to, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's just my unique testimony, right? And it's not
incredible.
because I'm just such a great man of faith and discipline. I am not.
It's grace.
It's because
a miracle.
it's God's grace.
Amen. Oh, that's so good. No, on that it's and of course, any of us who are raising kids, we just go, man, you don't have to do stupid things, like it doesn't make you any stronger or smarter. So yeah, I agree. And I've watched different folks, of course, as a pastor, like, well, I don't really have a testimony. I'm like, that is in and of itself a miracle.
You absolutely do. Right.
That's a miracle. Right. You're describing a miracle that is the kind of miracle we all wish our kids get to have. So,
I certainly wish for mine,
Yeah,
I do.
Me too.
But I mean, I get to college and I'm like, I'm faced with this.
I got to find
decision.
church.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, my sister, who had a very different, my sister who's a year older than me, she had a different experience with church.
Sure.
But had, at Augustana, which is in Rock Island in the Quad Cities, she came to faith through InterVarsity, of all things. And so now InterVarsity is on my mind, and these guys are either on the quad, talking to students. Cat named Eugene, interesting enough, that's my full name, Eugene, knocks on my door, Asian dude knocks on my door and says, hey, invites me to small group. And so I start going to this InterVarsity small group on my floor. And again, super white campus. I'm trying to figure out just like, you're really questioning things like, do people want me here,
Yeah, totally. Do I fit?
Or is this white dude just being nice to me, or like,
right?
Or is this genuine niceness, or is this just kind of like some game, right? It's
Right.
amazing all the things that's running, right? So I go to the small group. I'm the only black dude in the small group, but I start going to the small group, and then of course within InterVarsity, they have the large group meetings on Friday nights. Of course, a couple hundred people in there, and I'm maybe one of two. And so I'm getting used to all of this stuff. At the same time, I'm making friends, like in this small group. And these two white dudes, a guy named Steve and Andy, were on my floor. And so these guys, this is one of the whitest dudes you'll ever meet, right?
Right. It's just I can see it, like Steve and Andy.
Steve and Andy.
That's great. Yep.
And these dudes, we could not be more different.
Right.
We could not be more different. But these dudes become my dear friends, like dear friends. And the Lord, they were a gift to me. And they would unearth things. They would reveal perspectives that I had that were formed by the absence of meaningful relationship. And we just provided each other a window into our unique upbringing and culture, and the conversations we would have and the questions we would have for one another would just, I mean, is it spiritual formation or is it social formation or both, right?
Both. Yeah, exactly. And when you think about that, maybe you can think of one or two. What were one or two, or just a random awareness, like as you're talking to Steve or Andy?
Yeah.
What happens?
Well,
like
one
around
is one
family.
Going to. So Steve, interestingly enough, Steve was friends with my wife is from Urbana. So Steve went to high school with Shannon.
Okay.
So Shannon's not in the area at the time. She goes away to school.
Right.
But I become friends with Steve, which is how I later meet my wife, right? But Steve lives in the area, which means I can go to his house.
Yeah,
he regularly invites me to his house.
Yeah, come on over, man. I'm going by my house, right?
Yeah, let's go shoot hoops at the house, or mom's cooking something. And so I had been in a white person's house before, I don't think,
Right.
And it was like, to me, it was like TV.
Like, in what way? So you'd seen enough TV to be like,
I'd seen enough TV, and as a kid growing up, most of the shows are white people,
Right, totally.
There wasn't a whole lot of black shows until like the Jeffersons and like, what's happening stuff. So it was like, I don't know, man. It was just, Steve and Steve's parents were just so nice to me, and I wasn't unaccustomed to people being nice to me. People were nice to me my whole life.
Right.
But there was, and I don't mean this in a negative way, there was just this white niceness that was like, I hadn't experienced before, It was like a TV show,
So, but it's like, it's worth exploring this for just a second. When you say it was nice in a way you've not experienced, like an interaction, like in the.
I'm just saying, it was just new, right?
Right.
And you just used to just black stuff, black nices and rib, how we would joke with each other.
Right.
And
so it's got a little bit more of like a teasing, like it's connected in a different way.
Yeah, and it's just it's different in a million different ways.
Yes.
And this is your house. You've been over here a million times, boy. You know where the refrigerator is. You better go get you something. That was like, oh, I got refrigerator rights.
Yeah, now I'm in. Right.
I'm in. Whereas it was just different. It was like, hey, can I get you this? Can I get you this? Hey, you guys want to go? You guys need the car for something, right? It was just different,
right?
But it was so genuine.
Yeah.
You're almost suspicious of it first, like,
yeah.
What's the angle? Again, I realize I'm being very inarticulate about it, just because I don't really I've never had to give words to it before.
No, you're not being articulate. I think what you're demonstrating is those kinds of experiences. It's like everything about it's different.
Everything.
And it's difficult to explain unless you've experienced, right? Like, when you choose to step out of your context and into other environments, when you've really been in only one context.
Yeah, it's different.
It's not one or two things. It's not, they're wearing something different or they're cooking something different. I mean, people tend to major on the, whether it's food or dress or, even if but it's it's like, it's immersive. It's all of these things feel, to your point, almost scary at first.
Yeah, because Steve would be like, hey man, you can go over to the house. The door's open. Just let yourself in. And I'm like,
come on, man.
First of all, man, I'm not going to your house.
You don't know, right?
Look, we don't even return items to the store without a bag, and like we walk in like, hey, I'm bringing this back.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't steal this.
Hold it up.
So you want me to just walk in? And like, why is your door unlocked? What?
Your door should not be unlocked.
Is this a trap? Right? Is this a trap? This is a trap, isn't it? So I'm just telling you, man, everything was different. Right. But I was just loved so well. And it was just, and again, I wasn't this angry black dude came to college with a chip on my shoulder. I wasn't. But there was stuff in me that was being challenged by that type of kindness. And not only that, Chris Sweeney was one of the leaders, one of the adult leaders, and he would take me and Steve there was this little place called Delights on campus, little like ice cream coffee shop. And every week he would take us to Delights and he would open the scriptures to us. He was discipling us. We had this little thing we go through, and I had never experienced that. I'd been discipled by my father in just profound ways, but it was different. I'm like his kid. Like, this guy doesn't have to take time for me and buy me a tea or something every week and sit there and open the scriptures with. And so all these things with these different, and I'm just telling you about Steve and Andy. Yeah. Right. I didn't get into what the few Asian brothers that were in the fellowship and how I would have conversations with them, and it rewired me. It gave me a different outlook on the world more than anything. Growing up, white people were just like these nameless, faceless people. There were people over there. And not to mention, I grew up as a black man on the South Side. I had a very Afrocentric education. We didn't graze African-American history. Like, we got into it. And so my opinions of white people were shaped by real history. Sure. Not to mention, my parents grew up in the South. They were born in the South. And so they understood how that worked. So the absence of any meaningful interaction growing up, coupled with real history, and a dozen other factors, had discipled me toward a certain view of certain people. And so this was an intensive submersion, if you will, into a culture that wasn't my own. And this is even before I get to the Vineyard.
summer, Vineyard USA is hosting our national conference, Making All Things New, at Ridgecrest Conference Center just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, from Monday, July 31st to Thursday, August 3rd. We're creating an experience that'll be great for the entire family, adults, teenagers, and kids, as we focus on evangelism, church planting, and global missions. Registration opens to the public on February 8th with early bird pricing, so make sure to check out vineyardusa.org to learn more and register today. See you on the mountain.
What's so encouraging to me is that the bridge is faith. And so
It is.
I as far as, and of course, you and I have talked about this before, but my confidence that faith is the bridge is really, really high. We have our understanding of the cross is to divide, to break down every division, to erase the enmity between not just us and God, but us and one another. And these divides, you and I are part of a large cultural conversation where people were saying, how do we understand? How do we break these divides? How do we build bridges? And there's a lot of good things people are trying to figure out and about all over our culture. But because of my conviction around the cross and Jesus and the kingdom, I honestly don't think there's a more efficient way, nor, frankly, a more substantial way, because of the amount of healing necessary.
Right.
Frankly, the miracle required for someone's heart to be softened.
That's a good word, a miracle.
It's a miracle. So how are we trying to do miraculous things without the power of the Spirit? I mean, how in the world do we think the cross is not the main means by which, and that the hope of the world is to watch the church lead the way?
Hey,
I mean, that's where my confidence.
You said it.
We're talking to each other. We're both pastors, so I guess it's a little.
I think
we're just preaching to each other. But
is divine. It is divine. It's a work of the Spirit, and you bring the cross because the cross, all ground is supposed to be level beneath the cross, right? And so, so much of what we're talking about involves equity.
Yeah.
And righting historical wrongs and bringing those who have been estranged or those to be reconciled, right? And so the reconciling reality of the cross, how do you do this without that?
I don't know. And what's interesting to me is, yet you could see it conversely and say, with all of that in your heart and in your lexicon and in your life, all the hope for the church, all the love for Jesus, all the commitment as a follower of Jesus, there's still an obstacle when you walk into that campus. It's still hard. You're still going to Steve's house going, I don't know, this is weird. It's great, but it's weird. So, in other words, the point I'm making is, even with all of that connection, there's real work to do. You can't, it's not like just, it's not just magic. It's not like we're in some kind of culture-free zone if we're followers of Jesus.
There's real work.
That's right.
On every level, on all sides. There's real work.
Yes. Even with all that, to your advantage.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
It's real work. And it's interesting because I've heard bits of this, but I've not heard it to this detail. And so then that's got to help a ton as you walk your way into some Vineyard church.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I was going to what was Twin City Bible Church, which is right across the street from my dorm. Because that's where all the university kids were. It wasn't like I did this multi-week like church hop and this is where I landed. It was like walk across the street. That's
Guess
where
we're going there. Right.
And it was a super white church. Bill and Cindy Meyer were the pastors, and he was a faithful pastor, but it was just like very different from my church growing up. And also that's very, very white. So a buddy of mine from InterVarsity, guy named Kevin Morrissey, Kevin said, "Hey, Geno, I know you were talking about wanting a more kind of spirit-filled like church environment. You should check out the Vineyard." Like I went there, and I think this might be what you're describing. So I'm like, Vineyard, it's way off campus. So I go to the Vineyard one Sunday. Now I'm in my second year at the university. So I've gotten used to whiteness.
Right,
and
right.
lots of it, right?
It's less like jarring. Right.
Right. Which was helpful because when I got to the Vineyard, it was just super white room. I mean,
like super. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's another older black gentleman that I would regularly see there and a few others, but there weren't many.
Right.
There really weren't many. But again, I was socially prepared at this point to just be around an overwhelming amount of white people, which was good because I had a really great experience there. Now, let me just tell you, I walked into the Vineyard that Sunday, 2001, and I've been in the Vineyard ever since. Ever since.
Wow. So
I show up, worship happens, and of course, I've been primed for this because the worship in InterVarsity, I didn't know it at the time, but 90% of the catalog was Vineyard songs.
Right.
I had gone to Urbana 2000 the year before, which was a life-changing experience for me. And the Hungry record had just came out. And for some reason, they practically played the whole Hungry record at the Urbana conference. And so a lot of the songs were familiar because we were singing them in InterVarsity.
Right.
And so I'm at this really tender place. Again, I got better language for it. I'm at this really tender place where I am I'm trying to find myself as an adult with all this agency now to explore faith, but at the same time, I'm trying not to lose myself as a black man in this overwhelmingly white space, and it can be hard to understand that if you're a white person and you don't understand like the social pull toward conformity, the social pull toward assimilation. The vast amount of thinking you have to do about how you talk and what's funny, and it's just a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm carrying all this. I don't even know I'm carrying it fully yet, right? And so when I come to Vineyard and the worship I'd sit, it's like, third, fourth row right there, and I would just cry through the worship, which is not dissimilar to what would happen at the Urbana InterVarsity large groups. I would just be overcome with emotion and didn't really know why. Yeah. Right? But the Lord would just meet me powerfully. And so I'm in this church, and I don't remember what the message, it must have been okay. Right? But I remember seeing Hap across the room, and I knew he was a senior pastor. Again, it wasn't like he had a special chair or anything like that. Right. I knew he had a certain swag to him, right? And so I remember admiring that. I remember admiring that he wasn't making himself out to be, I'm the man here, but I could tell he was. Right. And I also see Ben Hare, who's the executive pastor at the time. And both of these guys, I mean, I stand out in this room. So they came to talk to me, and, they had a little guest cafe, and everybody's super nice to me, man. But as I would come back to that church, I would watch Ben Hare, who was the executive pastor at a good-sized church. I'd see him straightening chairs, or he'd walk past a piece of paper on the floor. He'd pick it up and throw it. And again, this may not seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but like my parents weren't this way, but we ran around with a lot of people that the pastor didn't do that. You know, right. And so somehow, some way, I was drawn to how accessible these guys were. Yep. And how if I wanted a meeting with them, I could get a meeting. I can get in that week. Yeah. And so I'm just being wrecked every week during the worship, singing these songs that really don't meet any cultural needs for me, right? Right. I'm so connecting with the simplicity of Vineyard ministry. And again, I come from a rich heritage, Christian heritage, full gospel church, black church, but something about how I like to do ministry really connected with the simplicity of the Vineyard philosophy of ministry, which is really interesting. It's an interesting layer because as you're a black person, black young man coming into this new church culture, you're super excited about it. Something really wacky happens that has to be undone later is that you go, you know what? My parents need to hear about this. When I go home, I'm going to straighten out.
I'm telling you, I was thinking all that right now. I was thinking, how does that go? With
it doesn't go well. It really does.
Well, because you're so connected to this church back home. This isn't like, oh yeah, I was going to this church, now I'm going to this church. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's been a lifestyle. It's been my relationships. It's been my familial understanding.
Sure.
So,
and I'm rooting for it, and I want it to thrive and survive, right?
Of course. So now you're like, hey, Dad, Mom, you got to hear about this thing. This is incredible. Hey, let me send you this.
19-year-old me, you don't plate it right. You don't say it right. And your excitement about what you discovered, in your eagerness to help them.
Right.
Now, you just got to imagine how all this lands on your black parents who are wondering if they're losing their black son in the vortex of whiteness. And here I come, and basically they hear me saying, you guys need to fix this stuff, right? And so it makes me sad because my father's no longer, my father's been with the Lord for the last 12 years. Mm-hmm. It makes me sad to this day to consider that he heard dishonor in my excitement. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
It makes me sad to this day because that wasn't what I was intending to. Brian Loritz wrote a book called Inside or Outsider, where he talks about how young guys like me need not lose ourselves in white evangelical spaces,
right,
and impose upon the black church all the fixing that we think needs to happen,
Yep.
And so that's another interesting layer of all this. My parents being thrilled that I'm going to church and I'm excited about ministry and I'm leaning toward ministry, but at the same time, they're like, boy, don't forget where you came from.
Yeah, hold on now. Right. And did you ever bring them? Like, were you like, you should come?
Oh, they would visit. Yeah. I mean, there was 3 of us down there at one point, so they would regularly visit. And of course they would visit, but I think they were just suspicious, not because the church gave them reason to be suspicious, but because of probably how I was presenting to them. It's like, Saul, has slayed thousands, but it's like, and because of that comparison, like Saul keeps a jealous eye now on David, right? So there's got to be some of this, like, who do these people think they are?
What is this?
Right?
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Right.
And where did you start to see some breakthrough? I mean, when? Because you obviously are in the vineyard now, so that didn't change for you, but you did become aware of, like, man, I got to do this differently, or.
Well, I mean, I was still nursing a bunch of discontent, just because I was just aware of how much it cost me to be in that space, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm later in life figuring out some of the language for it, but I realized I didn't want to hang out a lot. Well, I was a bit antisocial, but what I put together is that it took a lot of emotional energy to be around a lot of white people. And I'm not knocking white people, right? I'm knocking having to do a whole lot of life at somebody else's cultural center. It's exhausting. People say, Geno, why you don't hang out and stuff like that? What I didn't have the language to say, and would have been a little bit impolite to say, is, look, it costs me a lot of work to just be in this space all day. I just need to go either be by myself or be around some black people. Like, I didn't have that language.
Right.
Sure. So imagine, like, none of my cultural needs are getting met in the vineyard, but I got to spend a lot of time in the vineyard. Mm-hmm. And so over time, it's just a fatigue that sets in, and a discontentment that arises. So I'm telling you, I was always aware of that because I was always carrying a lot. So I go to black church on Wednesday nights, a few years in, just to worship with some black people, sing some black songs, hear some black preaching and that.
Well, and it's probably worth just kind of being there early in the greeting time, standing in the hallway, talking to some folks. All of those little things create familiarity from what you're used to, you know? And So it isn't.
And I thought about leaving the vineyard. I
bet
thought
you
about
did.
leaving. But you know what was striking to me? I felt, I mean, again, I didn't feel like it was the Lord at the time, but maybe it was. But I felt like I wanted to be there for the next black person that came in, so they could see something different than what I saw. Like, again, I didn't have that language at the time, but I just felt like responsible in that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Plus, I felt called to the vineyard. Like, I felt like I liked it enough that where it wasn't like this huge chore to be there. But I knew that the vineyard wasn't bending toward me. I didn't feel like, I felt like the people welcomed me, but I didn't feel like the organism like was.
Yeah.
I don't feel like the table was set for me, if that makes sense. I felt like I had to change my appetites, you know.
Yep.
And I don't know that that's being a good host, you know.
Right. No, I get it. And so when do you plant? When do you plant your church?
So I planted 2009.
2009.
But I feel the call to church planting, because you have to understand, Jeff. When I got there, one of the first people I meet is Jeff Heitkamp. Jeff is starting the God Search ministry, which would be similar to, I forget what you guys called it in
Joshua
Columbus.
House, young adult
Joshua
thing.
House.
Yep.
Sure. And they were starting this evening service. They called it 703. Service started at 703. To this day, I don't remember the significance of that. I'm sure it was some scripture reference.
Isn't it funny how we have these little super clever things like, oh man, this is so clever.
It was memorable though.
It stuck.
703
obviously.
is when the service started. Usually start around 7:05, but
right. It totally.
But Jeff, look, I'm not in the vineyard not for Jeff.
Wow.
Jeff and LaQ discipled me. They had me to their house. I mean, that formational stuff, you know, that space in your Christian life where you don't make it past that point without somebody saying hard stuff to you.
Yeah.
Or like telling you about yourself. Like that's where I was in the early 2000s. And Jeff was my discipler. And he always made time for me. He always made space for me. His office, he was a young adult pastor, so his office wasn't in the suite of offices where you had to get past the receptionist.
Right.
Like
he's by the stage somewhere. Yeah, right.
I lived across the street at the time, and so I would just walk whenever I needed something, whenever I was having a crisis, I literally walked across the street and I would knock on Jeff's door. And I'd see him through the glass. Now I realize now what an imposition it was. He was probably working on a sermon, but he would always
exactly.
He always did this. He just waved me in, right? And that's Jeff. And so Jeff went out to plant Minneapolis.
Right.
Tony ran Vestal. I don't know if you met Tony, but Tony
well,
is hired. Yeah. And so Tony goes out. Daniel Goulet kind of takes over that ministry. But at the same time, I'm thinking about church planting. So Daniel brings me alongside him.
Right.
And invites me to help pastor this young adult community, which has served as like the church within the church. Really safe place to practice your church planting craft in this really safe environment.
Totally.
And so I tell Hap about this vision God gave me. And Hap goes, he gives me a list of 4 people. He said, these 4 people, you cannot approach them. You cannot talk to them. But anybody else in the church, if they'll go with you, you can have them. You know?
Wow.
And so we spent 3 years, my wife and I didn't even talk about how Shannon and I met. My wife, who is white, the social experience that was.
I imagine.
You know?
Yeah.
And so all the other things I've described, my wife Shannon is like 10 times as intense as we're trying to figure out what have we gotten ourselves into, you know?
Both directions, I assume. Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she was the first, white girl I ever dated. And I wondered if this would work out,
Well, and bringing her home. I bet first time bringing her home, I bet that was, there was some stories to be told.
This is a story. My family's cool, like.
Of course they're cool.
Yeah.
But it's the same deal. It's the thing you were describing. It's all the things you don't know are happening.
Yes.
It's not just the things you know. It's that.
Right.
Like, it's just a little quiet conversation on the side. Like, I'm sorry, what are we doing? What is this?
Are those chitlins? Like, what are those?
Why is this like this? Why are we sitting here? Why are we going there? What did they say?
She got a more cooperative person than me because I had spent some years getting used to being in white spaces.
Yes.
Not so much for her. So
yeah, just instant. Here we go. Deep end of the pool. We're in. Right. That's good.
So,
well, it'd be worth having her on. Just be like, talk through that.
She would give you her side for sure. But we're walking this together, man. And again, she basically was told. If she tells the story, she was told by Hap when we started dating. She started coming around because she went to a different church across town, and she tells us that Vineyard had a reputation of being the weird, like the Holy Spirit.
The weirdos.
So, but she tells me that she said, "Well, Geno's pretty normal." I guess.
Right.
I guess the Vineyard must be okay. So she starts coming to the Vineyard. And she believes that in this space of time, we're trying to figure out which church we're going to go to. I don't remember thinking about whether or not I was leaving the Vineyard. Right. But Hap calls us into his office and he says, hey, I got plans for Geno. So what she heard was either you're in or he's going to find somebody
you might
else.
not be here. Yeah, right.
So we start with Hap's blessing this journey of just like gathering people. We taking people to coffee, to dinners and stuff like that, and explaining to them this vision we have of starting this Vineyard church that has this intentional multicultural focus. And so lots of people thought it was a great idea, but a handful of people, like their eyes would just like come alive as we told the story. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of these people were already in our network of small groups. So we would lead small groups, and multiply small groups, and we become small group coaches. And so a lot of the people who we were coaching had come out of our small group system, like out of our small groups anyway. And it turns out a bunch of those people turned out to be people who come on our church plant with us, right? So at the end of that 3 years, we had 11 people total. Just 11 adults and 2 kids. We had a 1-year-old at the time and somebody else on our team. And so at the end of June of 2009, we sell our homes and
just
quit our jobs. And we moved to the south suburbs of Chicago.
And by then is, because I'm trying to do the math, it sounds like within a couple years your father passes of
within
starting. A year.
Which is a gift because that I would come back because we didn't imagine that we would come back to the Chicago area. We didn't think that the community was diverse enough until my parents bought a house in that area when we would come to visit them, right?
Wow.
But I'd been away for a decade.
Right.
And so the Lord gifts me with this year that I have just 25 minutes away from my dad's house.
Yeah, what a gift. Yeah. And by then is he like, this is great. I'm so happy for you, son. I love this Vineyard thing.
My mom. No. He was. Of course, they wanted me to be the second generation of leadership in their church.
Of course, yeah.
But my mother would tell me that he would find a way to bring it up in any conversation he was having that his son was a pastor.
Yeah, that's cool.
Planning a church, right? So proud, so thrilled that we were moving there.
Sure.
I mean, he gets to, spend time with his grandson,
Totally.
And so I'm here for a year before Dad passes away, which was another experience all of itself. But we hit the ground in June of 2009. Really diverse team. I mean, we don't know anything about this community. We're trying to figure out where the grocery store is. Some of us don't even have jobs yet. Some of us are renting places because we haven't bought homes yet.
Yep.
And so in November of 2009, we start our first service in the basement in the Fellowship Hall of St. Paul Community Church in downtown Homewood. And we have 83 people show up at that first service, we felt like a mega church.
That's massive.
in that room.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my goodness, we got to print more bulletins. And Shannon and David, who is now our assistant pastor, he goes, you know, most of those people were our family, right? Like,
well, this is my favorite part of this is church planners. You have to believe that this is the starting point, right? You're like 83 next week,
right?
Could be 120. The week after that. I mean, we are going to go right through the 200 barrier, but within a month.
My wife begged me not to print extra bullets. She begged me. I asked Satan to get behind me.
And then it goes 83, 61.
No. That's too generous.
Oh, okay.
At the start of the second service, man, there was nobody in the audience but Shannon. Now we had a full, like, a lot of our plant team were worship people too, so we had a full band on the stage.
Oh, man.
There was more people on the stage than was in the audience.
This is a bad feeling. This is a bad feeling here.
I don't know, Jake. I don't know how I got through that Sunday.
I know, dude. Tell me about it.
And I wish I could tell you that as the worship songs progressed, the crowd swelled.
No, it's just like you're starting to turn toward each other, like on the stage, like you're just singing to each other, like there's nobody to sing.
It was so odd, man. It was so odd.
Right.
And two families trickle in, and they, interestingly enough, one of those families still with us today, and one would be with us had they not moved to Texas. But it was just, and you know how this goes, right?
Boy, do I know, man. It was years and years and years. I mean, it's a weird deal, but there's a certain kind of humility that God.
Yeah, I needed to be knocked down.
He changes you. You're different.
Yes. Yeah. And so, how...
And the litmus for me in that moment, Geno, and I've talked about this in other moments, but calling gets tested. First of all, do I think this is God?
Oh, yeah.
Second is, am I a discipler? Like, am I in the disciple-making pastor work? Is that what I've committed myself to? Because if I committed myself to being the man who does the cool thing in the room, if that's the thing I've committed to, this is not going to go anywhere. This is it. Mm-hmm. But if you have been discipled by and are making a commitment to be like the people who discipled you, am I the person that somebody just comes up to the office and waves me in? Am I the person that takes somebody to Delights? Is that what we said? Delights.
Yeah, Delights. Yeah.
And I'm doing the tea and the dessert. And we talk through the Bible. Am I that person?
Yeah, that gets tested real quick.
Oh, you find out like literally week one. Like it occurs to you as you get up there to give your beautiful sermon to your worship team plus 3. It occurs to you, wait a minute, this is probably not all there is.
Yeah, man. I mean, you and I, we planted out of large churches too, so there's that.
Yeah, it's the worst.
And it took me a couple years to shake that.
It feels bad,
as the mark for you come out of Columbus.
It was the worst. It was the worst. I mean, I would teach a class in Columbus that we didn't advertise. It's like in the bulletin, Healing 1. Jay Pathik's teaching. And nobody's going to come because Jay Pathik's teaching. So, but you walk in that room, there's 75 people, 100 people. Like, that's a small room, and you feel a little sad. Like, oh man, like 75 people came on a Wednesday. This is so disappointing.
Right.
But like now, flash forward 2 years later, you're like,
you would kill for
75. This is the best service
Easter.
Ever. Right. Exactly. Like your whole the way you see things has changed so much.
Yeah.
Or you quit, or you can't make it. I mean, or you're just like, this is misery. I can't live like this. But
well, the good thing is that I had our church planting experience.
That's right. You do. That's
and
true.
It was like, well, this is part of it. My father preached to empty seats.
Yep.
For a long time before, right?
Well, and I'm not crossfading a tape deck, at least. Hey, I
got a band.
Yeah, I'm starting way ahead. I mean, I've jumped like 5 stages from what I experienced.
Exactly. So it was. Look, now my wife. You get my wife on here. She was my most difficult church plant member. She will tell you
so
that.
Great.
So I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that. She would say that.
You can say that.
Her
Okay, good.
experience in those first couple years were not as
Like this-
awesome as I would describe.
Like, what
them. So
are we doing? Yeah, this
I'm
is
telling
the
you
worst.
about this super awkward second service, but I was living the dream, right?
Yeah, you're
am.
still pumped, right?
Right. And so we spend less than a year in that basement. We were in there right after the square dances, so it was a little musty. And
Fans, yeah,
right, yeah. So we find out that this Jewish community center across town is practically sitting empty. The demographic has shifted so much, right? Now, all the while we're doing ministry, we're throwing parties, cookouts, pig roasts, all kinds, anything we can do to gather people.
Right.
And the church is slowly growing. So we find this Jewish community center. And so we come over, and it's, other than a summer camp, this 9-acre Jewish community center is practically sitting empty throughout the year. So somehow we brokered this deal to rent the community center for $2,000 a month. All utility. I mean, it was just a ridiculous deal, right?
Wow.
And so we set up in the gym of this community center, and we just start having service. And so that rolls, and our church just kind of slowly grows.
Slowly ticks away, totally.
And but it's happening. I see this thing happening.
Yeah.
Right? It's like starting to take off, and we're starting to realize that if we set the table for a diverse cross-section of people, and we started with a diverse team, so we already have that street credit. We naturally are attracting biracial couples and people who are coming from different faith backgrounds, people from all over the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And so it's happening. Like,
Wow.
This is happening, right? And so at the same time, we were told when we were training for this that you'd be lucky to have your team for 1 year, 2 years, but they're like boosters. They're going to fall off. So as we clock through the years and our church is growing, our vision is coming to line. Nobody on our church plant team is leaving, right?
So great.
Year 1, 2, 5, 10, we're at now 13. I can't describe to you how significant it is and how helpful
miracle.
it is
Yeah.
to have those 13 people. Now, our families have swelled since then, right?
Sure.
We call them the OGs, the SSV
Right.
OGs, right? I can't tell you what it's meant to have those people here as we have all been able to taste the fruit of, because how many church plant team members get to experience the long-term fruit of the stuff that they sowed in those really awkward years, right?
Yeah, very rarely. That's right.
And so I can tell you, I mean, I know for the sake of time, I skipped a lot of details, but here we are 13 years in. When I stand to preach, Jay, on Sunday morning, in our space that we bought the community center, I see with my eyes what I saw in the vision God gave me when I was in Urbana, that we could have this diverse vineyard experience and have all these different kinds of people show up because we are still figuring out how to set the table that doesn't have all the black snacks on it.
Right.
Or this church ain't going to be black enough for somebody who wants a black church experience. It's just not. It's not going to be white enough for somebody who wants a white church experience, and on down the line.
Yep.
And we realize that those people will come, but they won't vibe with us because they're looking for something other than that. But for people who are willing to pay what it costs to be in a context where all your snacks aren't on the table, those people will come, and those people will help. They'll bring their brick to just build with us,
Yeah.
And so when people ask me these days, how's it going? How are you doing? I say half jokingly, but mostly serious, like I'm living the dream because we really are.
Yeah. An actual dream. That's right.
An actual dream, Jay.
That's so good,
and
man.
a lot of how I've been able to serve the movement, as many of us, we're giving the movement what has been cultivated in our local church context, right?
Yep. What a gift. So tell me, let's pivot because with just a little bit of time.
Sure.
Tell me about, so now, of course, we've moved towards associations, this framework, and now we're a year in, so we've had some gatherings. I was with you at
Yes, you were.
Black Pastors Leaders Association gathering, which was exciting, thrilling, hopeful. And tell me about how you're seeing from Geno walking into Champaign, then you're sort of leading in different contexts, area leader or executive team member, and now you're leading our Black Pastors and Leaders Association. What do you see that's shifting? What creates hope? What do you see as kind of the main bits that are in front of us right now?
Well, that's a good question. What's super hopeful, man, is like, as a person who's now spent a few decades in the vineyard as a Black man, to come out of the gathering, which was our Black Pastors and Leaders gathering, what occurred to me when I'm watching just the glee. I mean, you were in the room. The room was just electric.
Yeah.
What occurred to me is that there may never have been a vineyard space where, when the organizers thought, who we planning this meeting for? Like, whose needs, cultural needs, spiritual needs will we center as our... I don't know that wasn't the first meeting where Black people were the people the meeting was designed for. Now, if you can imagine being in the movement 2 decades and never walking into a room where you were the person they had in mind. You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
So what's super hopeful, and what the gathering did come to be something that people would not miss, because, we get to serve in this really diverse local church context, but most of the people in our association are serving in what we would call diversity deserts, where they're the only person on staff and one of few, right? And so to see that there is a vineyard space that centers Black people, and look, we invited those who were doing ministry to Black people, those who are non-Black. But we were explicit that this meeting is for, like, we had a Hammond organ, right?
Yep.
It was wild in there, right?
Well, I loved it. Yeah, totally.
And so that was so hopeful to me to be able to experience that after a few decades, and for people who are much newer to the vineyard than I am to be able to experience that as the vineyard values this and would spend resource in order to make it's like, well, maybe they're serious about this.
Yep.
And maybe there is a place for me here.
Yep.
Maybe and you were there, you heard the talks.
Yeah.
Maybe I do have permission to show up in my local, mostly white context as my Black self and let the chips fall where they may. Maybe they're serious about this, right? And so to me, that's what's most hopeful. And when I get on, we have a call every other month, and I hear the excitement that people have, and I hear even this, they share their stories and the challenges that they're facing, and how appreciative they are that there's a space where they can do that helpful, unguarded sharing, which brings so much healing and kingdom therapy, right? So there are dozens of things, and we've got a whole lot of work to do, but it's meaningful. It's meaningful. And
it is.
I don't know, having done this work for a long time in the vineyard, I don't know that I was hopeful. I was hoping that something good would come of this. I was cautious. I was skeptical.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, and I guess you and I have talked a lot about how there's information. That's important. We say, we teach, we get people to start thinking certain kinds of thoughts that maybe they've not thought before. Then there's context, there's gatherings, there's things we can do that like create moments, that create context. So in other words, we can preach things on stages, then we can have kind of moments within those gatherings. That those are all very important things. I mean, I think back to the conference in Columbus with Dr. Charles Montgomery preaching and having a few moments where it was like, oh, okay, this is something we're putting out front. These are conversations we're trying to have publicly. Of course, the spaces you've been hosting for a while, Better Together, and, trying to create resource and moments maybe within conferences. And those are really important. But it's as we move down the line, as we've been sort of adopting the ECC's sixfold test, you start asking different layers of questions around leadership structures, authority structures,
Yep.
budgets,
Power. Yeah.
Okay, so now and this isn't to detract from any of the things I said a moment ago. Those are all very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to continue to move those flywheels. Like, okay, so we got to keep talking about these things in public, in front of one another, casting a vision. The Revelation vision is an important vision of this is where we're headed, and especially given our kingdom theology.
Right.
That then we say, if that is what we believe the fulfillment of the kingdom is now and not yet. Obviously, we are seeing a lot of not yet in relation to that multi-ethnic church vision of Revelation. But that means we believe in a now as well. And we have a job to participate with the Spirit to see that kingdom come to bear now, not just in the future. So, okay, that's leadership. That's prayer. That's ministry. We're asking the Holy Spirit to give us grace to do that. But, man, it's got to keep moving down the line toward authority, leadership, cultural expressions that shift and change.
Yep.
So for me, being in that room with you, watching you lead over these years, seeing our leadership teams shift a bit is really encouraging.
Yep.
And there's work to be done. There's
Well, it helps energize the work when you have a few wins to celebrate.
But it really does. I agree. Yeah, it really does. And, of course, you're leading. Charles is leading. Our association leaders are excited, envisioned. We have different kinds of events, different kinds of training, different ways that core teams are forming and connecting. You're describing the monthly thing or this or that. But for me, when I zoom back a little, because it's easy to get in the weeds when you're a leader. It's like, okay, and how's that date work with this? And what are we doing that, But if I zoom back a little, there's no question in my mind, this is the work of the Spirit.
Yep.
And these are the kinds of things the Holy Spirit does and has been doing. But it requires leaders saying, I'm going to stand in the uncomfortable tension for a minute. You described in Champaign.
Yep.
I'm going to make it so somebody else experiences this differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, as we're at the doorway of Black History Month.
Right.
I don't know when this is going to air, but we'll be probably in it.
Yep.
To me, that's the richest part of it. That people gave their life to something that would improve the lives of people coming behind them. In fact, many of them didn't even taste the sweet fruit of that which they gave their lives for. You think about Dr. King's, right?
Yep.
He never got to taste what he was building towards.
No.
But where will we be were it not for his work, right? And so when it gets discouraging or angry or frustrated, when you want to quit, you think about, like, what we're called to is to consider who's coming behind us so that they can have a different experience than we experienced in our vineyard context. That's what motivates me a great deal,
So here's my final question. If you could go back and you get to talk to Geno walking in that Champagne room, you get to tell him something about the vineyard, you get to tell him something about him. You want to inspire him, encourage him, challenge him, care for him. You get like 5 minutes, and you can't say something like, buy Apple stock or something like that. Like you're talking to him. What would you want to say to him?
What I would say to him, and what I'd also be saying to people who are in a similar position, is don't be afraid to be yourself. What I mean by that is, if God wanted another white person, he'd have sent them, but he sent you. And so be a truth teller. Don't allow yourself to shrink down or be filed down to something more manageable, because people, just whiteness is a force. And it doesn't even have to actively be pushing against you or forcing you toward conformity. It just is what it is because it's power. It's what's centered, right? And so we don't want to stand out in the wrong ways, and we just sort of want to not make any waves. And so it might have taken me too long to realize that God was gifting the movement with me, a person with different perspective, a person with different, and it took me, I would say, too long to get comfortable just showing up as just who I was.
Yep.
You understand? Now, I don't have that issue right now, right? But I'm saying what I would say to me and somebody who's in the movement is the Lord brought you here to help us see what we don't see.
That's right.
Experience, you understand what I'm saying? I
do.
And so that's what I would have told myself.
That's good.
And I think that would have helped me in a dozen different ways.
Well, and what's so encouraging to me, Geno, is by the grace, the providence of God, somehow in there, He gave you so many gifts in the vineyard. Like you describing sitting there crying the worship and the sort of pathway in through IV, that there were enough gifts, there was enough blessing, there was so much encouragement that it enabled you to be like, okay, I can live in attention because I feel called and there is blessing in this for me. Mm-hmm. Which it wouldn't all, that's just grace. It wouldn't be everyone's experience. There would be plenty of others.
It hasn't been, right? So you crazy, man.
Yeah, they just walk in and go, this is all right. I mean, this is cool and all, but nah.
Right, I don't see what you see.
I can't, well, I just can't do it. I don't feel the call you do.
Right.
I'm just not doing it. So it does take some folks, by the call of God, by the faithfulness of their witness, some mix of ingredients to say, I'm making this a priority. And I'm just so grateful for you and the call of God on your life and the way you've led in our movement. And as I said, we got some work in front of us. We got a long way to go, but boy, we do have some road behind us too. There's been some stuff that has enabled us to have some courage in these new days. So I'm super, super grateful for you. Super excited about your church. It sounds like I have a podcast coming with Shannon. Tell me that.
She'll tell you the real story.
Call the other side. But yeah, I mean, seriously, you honor your wife. You love your kids. You lead just a really important church in our movement. I'm just really grateful for you. Thanks for making some time to talk to me, Geno.
No, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for your leadership as well, man.
Oh, yeah. Well, I feel called to it, much like you. It's calling. So,
well, onward.
Amen. All right. Thanks, man.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.